The stars burned cold over the Kirin Nexus, where 17 species had gathered to die together. Commander Velthor stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with eyes that had not known rest in 72 hours. The red markers representing the Void Swarm outnumbered his forces 3-1, and more kept appearing at the edge of the system. Another wave folding in from the western sector, his tactical officer reported, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Velthor nodded, saying nothing. What was there to say? They had known this day would come. The swarm consumed everything in its path, and the Galactic Coalition had been running out of space to run for the past 6 months. Admiral Koresh appeared on the communication screen, his rocky features cracked with battle damage. The Molten Guard had held the southern flank for 2 days straight, losing ship after ship to the relentless assault. Velthor, my shields are at 18%. We cannot hold much longer. Hold anyway, Velthor replied, though the words tasted like ash. Reinforcements are coming. But both of them knew the truth. There were no reinforcements. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon the Coalition possessed was already here, burning and dying in the black. The swarm vessels moved through space like a plague, their bioorganic hulls pulsing with sickly light. They did not negotiate. They did not communicate. They simply consumed, breaking down matter at the molecular level to fuel their endless expansion. Entire worlds had been reduced to barren rocks in their wake. Billions had died screaming as the swarm stripped their planets of all life. The first attack had come without warning 6 months ago. The border colony of Resh Prime had gone silent overnight. When the Coalition sent a scout ship to investigate, they found nothing but dust and the first swarm vessels feeding on the remains. Since then, the swarm had taken 43 systems and every battle had been a defeat. Velthor's ship shuddered as a swarm projectile tore through the port side. Alarms screamed across the bridge. Hull breach on decks 9-12. Emergency bulkheads engaged. His crew moved with practiced efficiency, but Velthor could see the fear in their eyes. They had all seen what happened when the swarm boarded a ship. The lucky ones died quickly. On his tactical display, another Coalition cruiser winked out of existence, overwhelmed by swarm fighters. That made 47 ships lost today alone. At the start of the battle, they had 219 vessels. Now they had less than half that number, and most of those were damaged beyond any hope of proper repair. Send another distress call, Velthor ordered. All frequencies, maximum power. Someone has to hear us. His communication officer looked up with sad eyes. Sir, we have been broadcasting for 6 days. If anyone was coming, they would be here by now. Velthor knew she was right, but he had to try. The Coalition stretched across hundreds of systems, thousands of worlds. Surely someone, somewhere, had the strength to help them. He watched the distress signal pulse outward into the void, carrying a simple message. This is Commander Velthor of the Galactic Coalition. We are making our final stand at the Kirin Nexus. If you can hear this, please help us. If you cannot help, then remember us. Remember that we fought. Deep in Coalition space, on the refugee colony of New Terrace, millions watched the news feeds with hollow eyes. They had fled the swarm's advance, leaving behind homes and loved ones. The camp stretched for miles, temporary shelters housing dozens of species. Children who had known nothing but war played in the dirt between tents. Their laughter a strange sound in such dark times. Maya Stevens, a human volunteer, distributed food rations to a family of Etheri refugees. There were not many humans in Coalition space anymore, not since the Separation War 50 years ago. Most had retreated to Earth and its colonies, sealing themselves away behind their borders. Maya was one of the few who had stayed, believing that the galaxy needed unity, not division. Is it true? An Ethari child asked her, his large eyes reflecting the fear his parents tried to hide. Is the swarm coming here? Maya forced a smile. The fleet is protecting us. Commander Velthor is the best officer in the Coalition. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they rang hollow. The swarm could not be stopped. It could only be delayed. That night, Maya stood outside her tent and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, humans lived in their sealed systems, safe behind their borders. They had the technology, the weapons, the ships to make a difference in this war. But they would not come. The Separation War had driven a wedge between humanity and the rest of the galaxy, and that wound had never healed. She remembered her grandfather's stories of the old days, when humans fought alongside the Coalition as equals. But those days were gone, lost to bitterness and blood. Now humanity looked inward, caring nothing for the galaxy that had once welcomed them. Back at the Karen Nexus, Velthor's ship took another hit. This time the damage was catastrophic. The main reactor flickered, power systems failed across multiple decks, and the artificial gravity cut out on the bridge. Officers floated in zero gravity, desperately trying to keep their stations operational. "Engines are gone," his pilot reported. "We are dead in the water." Velthor pulled himself to the captain's chair, magnetic boots engaging to lock him in place. Through the viewport, he could see Koresh's flagship breaking apart, its hull torn open by swarm weapons. The Admiral's final transmission was a roar of defiance cut short by static. The swarm vessels closed in, their biohulls pulsing with anticipation. Velthor knew what came next. He had seen it happen to dozens of ships over the past months. The swarm would board them, consume the crew, break down the ship for raw materials. Nothing would remain. He activated his personal recorder, hands steady despite everything. "This is Commander Velthor of the Galactic Coalition. If anyone finds this message, know that we fought to our last breath. Know that 17 species stood together against the darkness. Know that hope died here, at the Kieran Nexus, but it died with honor." He paused, watching the swarm vessels fill his viewport. "To whoever survives this war, if anyone does, remember us. Remember that we tried." The first boarding pod struck his ship and the alarms began to scream. Velthor drew his sidearm and stood to face the corridor, where the sounds of battle were already echoing. Around him, his crew did the same. They would not die cowering. The bridge doors exploded inward and the swarm poured through like a living nightmare. Velthor fired until his weapon ran dry, then drew his blade. He would die as he had lived, fighting for something bigger than himself. But in the depths of space beyond the Coalition's borders, something stirred. Ancient shipyards hidden beyond Neptune hummed with activity. 500 vessels, sleek and deadly, prepared for a journey they had been building toward for 50 years. Humanity had been silent for so long that the galaxy had forgotten them. They were about to remember. 53 years ago, Earth burned, not from alien weapons or cosmic disasters, but from human hands turned against each other. Captain Jake Morrison remembered that day like it was yesterday, though his hair had long since turned gray and his bones ached with every movement. He sat in his apartment on Mars, watching the news feeds from Coalition space, and saw the ghosts of his past in every burning ship. The separation war had started over a simple question: should humanity remain part of the Galactic Coalition, or forge its own path among the stars? Some believed the Coalition held humanity back, imposing restrictions on expansion and technology development. Others argued that unity with alien species made humanity stronger, safer, and wiser. The debate had raged for years in political chambers and public forums. Then someone fired the first shot. Jake still did not know who. Maybe it did not matter. Once the violence started, it spread like wildfire across 30 systems. Earth loyalists fought colony separatists. Brothers took up arms against brothers. Entire fleets engaged in brutal combat while civilian stations burned in the crossfire. Jake had been a young officer then, commanding a destroyer in the Earth Defense Force. His orders were clear: stop the separatist advance at any cost. But when his targeting systems locked onto his brother's ship in the outer Saturn orbit, everything became complicated. He had hesitated for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds his brother had fired first. Jake's ship had survived. His brother's had not. The war lasted 4 years and claimed 6 billion lives. Colonies were bombarded from orbit. Habitats were breached and left to die in the void. Ships rammed each other in desperate last stands. By the end, neither side had won. Both had simply run out of the will to keep killing each other. Jake had been one of the officers who brokered the Accord of Mars, the treaty that ended the bloodshed. The terms were harsh but necessary. Humanity would withdraw completely from the Galactic Coalition for 50 years. All human vessels would return to Earth-controlled space. No contact, no trade, no communication. 50 years of isolation to heal the wounds they had inflicted on themselves. The Coalition had watched humanity tear itself apart with a mixture of horror and pity. Some species had offered to mediate, but humans had refused all outside help. This was their mess to clean up. When the Accord was signed and human ships began their exodus from Coalition space, many aliens believed they would never see humanity again. Some thought humans would finish destroying themselves in private. Others thought they would simply fade away, another species too violent and divided to survive. But humanity did not destroy itself. Instead, it rebuilt. The process was slow and painful, like setting broken bones. The colonies on Earth formed the Terran Federation, a unified government that gave each world a voice while maintaining overall coordination. The old grudges did not disappear overnight, but people learned to work together because the alternative was extinction. Admiral Lisa Grant had been a civilian during the war, a mother living on Europa with her daughter. She remembered the day the separatist forces attacked the orbital platforms, how she had held her daughter while the station shook and alarms screamed. She remembered the evacuation, the desperate run to the transport ships, and the explosion that took her daughter from her. She remembered everything, and those memories drove her every day. After the war, Lisa joined the new Terran Federation Navy. She rose through the ranks not because of political connections or family influence, but because she was brilliant, dedicated, and absolutely unwilling to let humanity be caught unprepared ever again. When the Federation Council approved the construction of a new fleet, they put Lisa in charge of the entire project. The shipyards were built in secret, scattered throughout the outer system where no coalition scout would ever find them. Neptune's orbit became home to massive construction facilities, each one building vessels that incorporated every lesson humanity had learned from its brutal civil war. These were not the old coalition-era ships that humans had once flown. These were something new, something deadly. Lisa stood in the command center of Shipyard 12, watching construction drones swarm over the hull of her flagship. The Defiant was 3 times the size of the old battlecruisers, armored with composite materials that could withstand direct hits from weapons that would have vaporized earlier vessels. Its engines used quantum fold technology, allowing it to jump in and out of space without relying on slow hyperspace lanes. Its weapons could punch through almost any known armor. "Admiral, the reactor test is complete," a technician reported. "Zero-point generation is stable at 104% of projected output." Lisa nodded, checking the data herself. Zero-point reactors pulled energy directly from quantum fluctuations, providing nearly limitless power. It was technology humanity had theorized for decades but only perfected in isolation, when they had nothing to do but solve problems and build solutions. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Cole sat in the cockpit of his fighter, running through pre-flight checks for the 100th time that week. He was 28 years old, born 3 years after the accord was signed, and he had grown up in a humanity that knew nothing but preparation. His instructors had trained him relentlessly, pushing him beyond what he thought were his limits, because they all understood the same truth. When humanity returned to the stars, they needed to be ready for anything. Ryan's fighter was a work of art, a small craft that could outmaneuver anything the old coalition forces had possessed. It carried weapons powerful enough to damage capital ships and shields that could absorb hits that would destroy larger vessels. But more than the technology, Ryan had been trained in tactics that came from humanity's most brutal teacher: war against itself. "Alpha Squadron, report for briefing." The command channel crackled. Ryan sealed his helmet and made his way to the briefing room, where 24 other pilots waited. They were the best of the best, selected from thousands of applicants, and they all shared the same determination. If humanity ever had to fight again, they would do it right. The training never stopped. Every day, somewhere in the Terran Federation, soldiers drilled, engineers tested new systems, and commanders studied battle scenarios. Humanity had 50 years of isolation, and they used every single day to prepare for a return they all knew would eventually come. Danny Foster worked in the engine room of a heavy cruiser, his hands covered in grease and his mind focused on solving a problem with the cooling system. He was a third-generation engineer, following in the footsteps of his grandmother who had helped design the first zero-point reactors. For Danny, every bolt he tightened and every system he optimized was a promise. Humanity would never be weak again. As the years passed, humanity watched the galaxy from a distance. They monitored coalition transmissions, tracked political developments, and noted technological advances. Some humans argued for early contact, for rejoining the galactic community before the 50 years were up. But the majority voted to honor the accord. They had made a promise, and keeping promises mattered. Jake Morrison, now an old man living in quiet retirement, gave lectures at the Federation Naval Academy. He spoke to young officers about the cost of war, about the moment he had hesitated before firing on his brother, about the millions who had died because humans forgot how to talk to each other. His message was always the same. Strength without wisdom was just violence, and violence without purpose was just murder. But he also taught them about duty, about standing up when it mattered, about knowing when to fight and when to extend a hand. Because the separation war had taught humanity a terrible lesson, but it had also taught them something valuable, that they could survive anything if they chose to survive together. When the 50-year isolation period finally ended, the Terran Federation had 500 warships ready for deployment, trained crews numbering in the millions and technology that rivaled anything in known space. They had rebuilt their civilization from ashes and emerged stronger than before. President Helen Brooks stood before the Federation Council, ready to present the question that would define humanity's future. The isolation was over. The galaxy awaited. What would humanity choose to do next? Before she could speak, the communication system lit up with urgent priority. Coalition distress signals flooded every channel, desperate pleas for help against something called the Void Swarm. The messages painted a picture of total war, of species facing extinction, of a galaxy burning. The council chamber fell silent as they listened to Commander Velthor's transmission, his voice carrying the weight of doom. Helen looked at Lisa Grant, at Jake Morrison, at every face in that room. The question had answered itself. Humanity had spent 50 years preparing to be strong. Now they would discover what they were strong for. The Federation Council chamber had never been so quiet. President Helen Brooks stood at the central podium, her hands gripping the edges while she watched 50 years of careful neutrality collide with the reality of genocide happening across the galaxy. Around her, council members from every major human world sat in their seats, faces reflecting the same terrible calculation: save themselves or save strangers. The coalition distress signals have been broadcasting for 6 days, Helen said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Intelligence estimates they have less than 48 hours before complete collapse. After that, the Void Swarm will control over half the known galaxy. Council member Richard Stone from Europa leaned forward, his face hard. And we should care about this. Why exactly? The coalition watched us bleed during the separation war and did nothing. They sealed their borders and let us sort out our own mess. Now they want us to come running when they need help? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Helen had expected this. The wounds from the war ran deep, and 50 years had not been enough to heal them all. Many humans felt abandoned by the coalition, left to destroy themselves while alien species watched from safe distances. Because 6 billion dead humans taught us something, Admiral Lisa Grant said, standing from her seat. She wore her dress uniform, metals gleaming, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had lost everything once and refused to lose anything again. It taught us that turning away from suffering because we feel wronged makes us no better than those who wronged us. She moved to the central display, pulling up projections that made several council members gasp. The swarm is not going to stop at coalition borders. Our analysts have run every simulation. If the coalition falls, the swarm spreads unchecked. They will reach Terran Federation space in 18 to 20 years. Maybe we can hold them off alone. Maybe we can build enough ships and weapons in that time. But maybe is not good enough when the alternative is extinction. Council member Patricia Hughes from Mars stood, her elderly frame still straight with military bearing. The Admiral is correct. Isolation bought us time to heal, but it was always temporary. The galaxy is connected whether we like it or not. The swarm does not care about our borders or our feelings. It only cares about consuming everything in its path. Then we reinforce our defenses, Stone argued. We use these 18 years to build more ships, better weapons. We protect our own people first. And abandon 17 species to death, Commander Alex Bennett said quietly from her seat near the back. All eyes turned to her. Alex had served with the coalition before the separation war, one of the few humans who maintained unofficial contacts during the isolation years. She had friends out there, people she had fought beside, people who were dying right now. She stood and walked to the center of the chamber, pulling up a holographic image. This is Commander Velthor. I served with him 12 years before the war. He saved my life during the Kandor incident when our ship was boarded by pirates. He did not have to do that. I was just some human officer he barely knew. But he did it anyway because it was right. The hologram shifted to show other faces, alien features that looked strange to most humans but familiar to Alex. This is Captain Shirel of the Science Corps. She taught me orbital mechanics and bought me drinks when my father died. This is Dr. Koresh, who spent 30 years studying human biology to help cure diseases that affected our colonies. These are not strangers. These are people. They have families. They have dreams. They have children wondering if their parents will come home. Alex's voice broke slightly, but she pushed through. I know we were hurt. I know the Coalition could have done more during our war. But we can do better than they did. We can be the species that shows up when it matters. We can be the ones who prove that strength is not just about protecting yourself, but about standing up for others. The chamber erupted in argument. Some council members stood to voice their support, others their opposition. Helen let them talk, understanding that this decision would define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. They could not make it lightly. Jake Morrison had been sitting silently in the observer section. An old man granted special permission to witness this historic moment. Now he slowly stood and the chamber gradually quieted. Everyone knew who he was. The captain who had helped end the separation war, the man who had killed his own brother in battle, and then spent decades teaching others to choose differently. May I speak, Madam President? He asked. Helen nodded. The chair recognizes Captain Morrison. Jake moved to the center with slow, careful steps. His voice was soft, but in the silent chamber everyone heard every word. I murdered my brother. Not in the heat of passion, not by accident, but in cold calculation. I locked weapons on his ship and I fired because my orders told me to. He died screaming, and I listened to every second of it before the explosion ended the transmission. The chamber remained absolutely silent. I tell you this because I want you to understand the cost of choosing wrong. I chose duty over family, orders over love, and it hollowed me out inside. It took me 30 years to learn how to sleep through the night again. Some nights I still can't. He looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as he could. The Coalition did not help us during our war. That was wrong. They should have tried harder, risked more, cared more, but we have the chance to do better than they did. We have the chance to be the people we wish they had been. Jake pulled up the tactical display showing the swarm's advance. This is not about the Coalition. This is about us. About who we choose to be when nobody is watching, when nobody can force us to do the right thing. We spent 50 years building the strongest fleet in known space. The question is not whether we can make a difference. The question is whether we will. He turned to face Helen directly. I have killed enough people to know that living with action you regret is hard. But living with inaction you regret is impossible. If we stand by and let billions die when we could have helped, that choice will haunt humanity forever. Our children will ask us what we did when the galaxy burned, and we will have to tell them we did nothing because we were afraid and angry. Helen watched the old captain return to his seat, saw the tears on his weathered face and knew the decision in her heart. But this was not a dictatorship. The council needed to choose and the vote would be binding. I call for a vote, she announced. All in favor of deploying the Terran Federation fleet to aid the Galactic Coalition against the Void Swarm, say aye. The ayes came slowly at first, then faster. Alex Bennett voted immediately, her voice strong. Lisa Grant voted next, followed by Patricia Hughes. Jake Morrison had no vote, but his presence seemed to tip the scales. More council members stood to voice their support, some with tears, others with grim determination. When the opposition voted, their nays were fewer than expected. Richard Stone abstained, unable to vote yes but unwilling to vote no when he saw the tide turning. The final count was 62 in favor, 23 opposed, 15 abstentions. Helen felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The motion passes. Admiral Grant, you are authorized to deploy the expeditionary fleet immediately. You will operate under Terran Federation command, not as Coalition subordinates. We fight as equals or we do not fight at all. Lisa stood at attention. Understood, Madam President. How many ships am I authorized to deploy? Helen looked at the tactical displays, at the simulations showing swarm strength, at the desperate messages still flooding in from Coalition space. All of them, Admiral. Every ship we have. If we are going to do this, we do it right. The chamber erupted in activity. Orders were transmitted to every shipyard, every base, every training facility. Across human space, alarms sounded and crews rushed to battle stations. Ships that had been built in secret for 50 years powered up their reactors for the first time in combat conditions. Ryan Cole received his deployment orders while running combat simulations. He looked at his squadron mates, saw their nervous excitement, and felt his own heart racing. This was what they had trained for their entire lives. This was the moment everything changed. Danny Foster and his engineering team worked frantically to ensure every system on their cruiser was perfect. They had 48 hours to prepare for a fight that would determine the fate of the galaxy. No pressure. In his apartment on Mars, Jake Morrison watched the ships begin to assemble at the jump coordinates, 500 vessels representing humanity's greatest achievement and greatest gamble. He thought about his brother, about all the people who had died during the separation war, about the lessons learned in blood and fire. Be better than we were, he whispered to the ships on his screen. Show them what humanity can be when we choose right. At the jump point beyond Neptune, Admiral Grant stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching her fleet form up in perfect order. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, executing maneuvers they had drilled 1,000 times. Everything they had built, everything they had prepared for, came down to this moment. All ships report ready. Admiral, her communications officer announced. Lisa looked at the coordinates for the Kieran Nexus, where Commander Velthor woke to darkness and pain. He did not remember losing consciousness, only the feeling of swarm claws tearing through his shoulder and the bitter taste of defeat. Now he lay in what remained of his ship's medical bay, kept alive by emergency systems that were slowly failing. Around him, a handful of crew members remained, their faces hollow with exhaustion and despair. "Commander," his tactical officer whispered from across the bay, her voice weak. "You should not move. Your wounds are severe." Velthor forced himself to sit up, biting back a scream as his injured shoulder protested. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the Kieran Nexus burning. Debris fields stretched for thousands of kilometers, the remains of coalition ships that had fought to their last breath. The swarm vessels circled like carrion feeders, their biohulls pulsing with satisfaction. 6 days had passed since the siege began. Koresh was dead, his flagship torn apart in the first hours of battle. Most of the coalition fleet was gone, scattered and broken. Velthor's own ship was a gutted wreck, held together by emergency fields and prayers to gods he no longer believed in. They had maybe 12 hours of life support left. Then the cold would take them, which was better than letting the swarm have them. "Any response to our distress calls?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Nothing, sir. We are alone." Velthor closed his eyes. He had done everything right, followed every tactical doctrine, made every correct decision. It had not mattered. The swarm was simply too strong, too numerous, too relentless. The coalition had bet everything on this final stand, and they had lost. "Sir, sensors are detecting something," another officer called out, confusion in his voice. "Multiple quantum signatures at the edge of the system. Very large, very powerful. Swarm reinforcements?" Velthor asked, forcing himself to his feet. If this was the end, he would face it standing. "No, sir. These are different. The energy readings are unlike anything in our database. They are not using hyperspace. They are folding space itself." Velthor limped to the nearest working console, his good hand pulling up the sensor data. What he saw made no sense. 500 signatures, each one massive, appearing from nowhere in perfect military formation. No species in the known galaxy had that kind of technology. No one except, "Are those human ships?" his tactical officer asked in disbelief. The view screen flickered to life, showing the impossible sight of a fleet that should not exist. The vessels were sleek and deadly, armed with weapons that made coalition battlecruisers look like toys. They moved with perfect precision, each ship knowing exactly where it needed to be. At their center flew a flagship that radiated power like a small sun. A communication request flashed across Velthor's console. With shaking hands, he accepted it. The face that appeared on screen was human, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war. "Commander Velthor, I am Admiral Lisa Grant of the Terran Federation. Sorry we are late to the party. Let us even the odds." Before Velthor could respond, the human fleet opened fire. The effect was devastating. Railguns that accelerated projectiles to relativistic speeds tore through swarm bioarmor like paper. Energy weapons that drew power from quantum reactors cut capital ships in half. Missiles that could track and adapt to evasive maneuvers turned swarm fighters into expanding clouds of debris. The swarm, which had never retreated in living memory, suddenly found itself facing an enemy it did not understand. They tried their standard tactics, swarming the largest ships with overwhelming numbers. But the human vessels simply folded space, appearing behind their attackers and firing at point-blank range. Ryan Cole sat in his fighter's cockpit, hands steady on the controls as he led Alpha Squadron into the chaos. His training had prepared him for this moment, but nothing could prepare someone for the sight of a real battle. Swarm bioships filled the space ahead, their organic weapons spitting corrosive projectiles that ate through conventional armor. Alpha Squadron, break and attack, Ryan ordered, his voice calm despite his racing heart. Watch your shields and trust your training. His fighter accelerated hard, dodging through incoming fire with reflexes honed by years of simulation and drill. The heads-up display highlighted targets, calculated trajectories, and provided firing solutions faster than any organic mind could process. Ryan squeezed the trigger, sending a stream of high-energy bolts into a swarm fighter. The alien ship shuddered and exploded, its biohull unable to withstand the thermal shock. Around him, his squadron moved like a school of fish, each pilot covering another's blind spots. Each attack coordinated through neural link communication systems. They were not just good, they were perfect. And the swarm had no counter for perfection. On the Defiance Bridge, Lisa watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The swarm was adapting quickly, as intelligence reports had predicted. They were learning to target human shield generators to coordinate their attacks better. But adaptation only worked if you survived long enough to learn, and Lisa had no intention of giving them that time. Target their capital ships, she ordered. I want every swarm vessel over 500 meters destroyed in the next 10 minutes. Show them what happens when they mess with the wrong species. The Defiance main cannon charged, drawing power directly from the zero-point reactor. The weapon represented the pinnacle of human engineering, a gun that could crack planets if properly targeted. When it fired, space itself seemed to scream. The beam crossed the distance in microseconds and struck a swarm capital ship dead center. The alien vessel simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that not even debris remained. The other swarm ships hesitated, their alien minds processing something they had never experienced before: fear. Danny Foster worked frantically in the Defiance engineering section, rerouting power and compensating for battle damage. A lucky swarm hit had overloaded the secondary cooling system, and the main reactor was running hot. One wrong move and the ship would turn into a miniature star, taking half the human fleet with it. Come on, Danny muttered, his hands flying over the controls. He bypassed 3 damaged circuits, shunted coolant through auxiliary lines, and manually triggered emergency venting. The temperature dropped slowly but steadily. The reactor stabilized. Danny allowed himself one breath of relief before moving on to the next problem. All across the human fleet, engineers like Danny performed miracles. They kept damaged ships fighting when they should have been dead in space. They coaxed extra power from overtaxed systems. They found solutions to problems that had no right answers, because that was what humans did. They adapted, improvised, and refused to accept defeat. The battle raged for 18 hours. The swarm threw everything at the human fleet, every tactic and weapon they possessed. They tried ramming attacks only to watch human ships fold space at the last second. They tried overwhelming single vessels with numbers, only to face coordinated fire from multiple ships. They tried corrosive spores that ate through metal, only to have human crews vent infected sections and seal bulkheads with ruthless efficiency. Velthor watched it all from his dying ship, unable to look away. He had fought the swarm for months, studying their patterns, learning their tactics. The humans were doing things he had never imagined possible. They were not just winning. They were dominating. How? He whispered. How are they so strong? His tactical officer, who had also been watching in awe, answered quietly. They fought themselves, Commander. For 4 years, humans killed other humans. They learned every dirty trick, every brutal tactic, every way to hurt someone who thinks like you. The swarm is alien and terrifying, but it is not as scary as fighting yourself. As the 18th hour approached, the swarm made a decision that shocked every coalition observer. They retreated. The bioships that remained disengaged from combat and fled into hyperspace, abandoning the Kirin Nexus for the first time in 6 months of fighting. The human fleet did not pursue, instead forming a defensive perimeter around the surviving coalition vessels. Lisa opened a channel to Velthor's ship, her face appearing on his damaged view screen. She looked tired but satisfied. Commander Velthor, are you still alive? Barely. Velthor managed, his voice hoarse. Admiral Grant, I do not understand. Why did you come? Humanity owes us nothing. We did not help you during your war. Lisa was quiet for a moment, her expression softening. No, you did not. And we remembered that. But we also remembered something more important. We remembered what it cost us to turn on each other, to let anger and pride matter more than doing what was right. We remembered burying 6 billion people because we forgot how to be better than our worst impulses. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting his through the screen. You asked why we came. We came because we could. We came because standing by while billions die would make us the people we swore we would never be again. We came because hope is not something that dies, Commander. Sometimes it just needs to find its way home. Velthor felt tears streaming down his face, not from pain, but from something he had not felt in months. Relief. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for being better than we deserved. Save your thanks, Lisa said with a slight smile. This was just one battle. The war is far from over, but you are not alone anymore. Humanity is... 3 months after the Battle of Kirin Nexus, Admiral Lisa Grant stood in what used to be Coalition High Command headquarters and studied a star map that told a story of slow, grinding progress. 7 systems had been reclaimed from the Void Swarm, 7 victories paid for with blood and sacrifice. But the map showed 43 systems still under swarm control, each one representing billions of lives lost or enslaved. We are pushing them back, Commander Velthor said from beside her. His wounds had healed, thanks to human medical technology that could regenerate tissue at the cellular level. He wore a coalition uniform again, but he commanded a mixed fleet now, human and alien ships working together like they had never been apart. For the first time in 7 months, the swarm is losing ground. Lisa nodded, her eyes tracking swarm movements on the tactical display. They are adapting faster than we predicted. Every battle, they learn something new. Every tactic we use works once, maybe twice. Then they develop a counter. We need to stay ahead of them. She pulled up casualty reports, her jaw tightening. The human fleet had lost 37 ships in 3 months of constant fighting. Nearly 12,000 people dead. Their names added to a list that grew longer each day. Every loss hit her like a personal failure, but she could not let that stop her. The war was far from over. In the training facility on Europa, Ryan Cole stood before a classroom of coalition pilots and tried to explain human combat philosophy. The aliens looked at him with a mixture of respect and confusion, their species having developed very different approaches to warfare over thousands of years. You fight like you are trying to preserve your ships, Ryan said, highlighting a recent battle recording. You pull back when shields drop below 50%. You retreat when ammunition runs low. You try to minimize losses. He paused, making sure they were following. That makes sense for a species that has been at peace for generations, but it does not work against the swarm. He changed the recording to show a human squadron engaging swarm fighters. We fight like we are already dead. We push forward when shields fail. We use our ships as weapons when ammunition runs out. We accept that some of us will not come home because that is the cost of making sure others survive. A molten guard pilot raised his rocky appendage. This sounds like suicide tactics. It sounds that way, Ryan agreed. But it is not. We are not throwing our lives away. We are spending them carefully on things that matter. Every human pilot knows exactly how much their ship can take, exactly when to push and when to pull back. We train until those decisions are instinct. The swarm thinks we are reckless, but we are actually very precise. We just look reckless because we are willing to risk everything when the alternative is losing everything anyway. The coalition pilots absorbed this, some nodding slowly. They had seen human tactics work where coalition doctrine failed. They were here to learn, no matter how uncomfortable the lessons might be. On the research station orbiting Mars, Danny Foster worked alongside a team of alien engineers to integrate human technology with coalition systems. The challenges were enormous. Human ships used quantum fold drives while coalition vessels relied on hyperspace. Human weapons drew power from zero-point reactors while coalition guns used fusion cores. Making them work together required understanding both systems perfectly. The problem is efficiency, a Kandorian engineer explained, his tentacles gesturing at the holographic schematics. Your reactors produce 3 times more power than ours, but your weapons require that much power. Our ships cannot generate enough energy to use your guns. Danny studied the problem, his mind working through possibilities. What if we do not try to copy our weapons exactly? What if we use our reactor design to boost your existing guns? Keep the same firing mechanism but triple the power supply. Your ships could punch above their weight without needing a complete refit. The alien engineer considered this, running simulations on his console. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. That could work. It would take months to implement fleet-wide, but it could work. This was happening across the galaxy, humans and aliens sharing knowledge they had hoarded for generations. Coalition species learned human engineering techniques. Humans studied alien biology and chemistry, discovering new materials and medicines. The war was forcing cooperation that politics never could. On New Terrace, Maya Stevens helped organize the refugee camps that now housed survivors from a dozen liberated worlds. The camps were still crowded, still desperate, but they were no longer hopeless. Human supply ships arrived weekly with food, medicine, and building materials. Human doctors worked alongside coalition healers, sharing techniques and learning from each other. A young Etheri boy, the same one who had asked Maya if the swarm was coming, now played with human children in the camp's recreation area. They could not speak each other's languages perfectly, but laughter needed no translation. Maya watched them and felt something she had not felt in years: optimism. President Helen Brooks addressed the Terran Federation from Earth, her face broadcast to every human world and colony. 3 months ago, we made a choice that many questioned. We sent our fleet to fight for people who were not our responsibility, to risk our people for aliens who did not help us in our darkest hour. Some said we were fools. Some said we would regret it. She paused, letting the moment breathe. They were wrong. Since we joined this war, we have learned more about ourselves and our place in the galaxy than we did in 50 years of isolation. We have proven that humanity can be trusted, that we keep our promises, that we stand up when it matters. And in return, the galaxy has welcomed us back not as junior members or second-class citizens, but as equals. On the screen behind her, images appeared. Human and alien soldiers fighting side by side. Engineers collaborating on projects. Doctors saving lives together. This is who we are now. This is who we choose to be. Not a species that hides behind borders, but a species that steps forward when the darkness comes. In Coalition space, a historic meeting took place aboard the Defiant. Representatives from all 17 Coalition species gathered with human diplomats to establish new protocols, new agreements, new ways of working together. Gone were the old hierarchies that had placed some species above others. In their place came a more equal partnership, one earned through shared sacrifice. Commander Alex Bennett led the human diplomatic team, using her knowledge of coalition politics to navigate complicated negotiations. She had argued for humanity's return, and now she worked to make sure that return was permanent and beneficial for everyone. The old coalition was built on the idea that some species were more advanced, more civilized, more worthy of leadership. Alex said during one heated discussion. That system failed. It failed because it created resentment and division. The new coalition must be built on merit and contribution, not on who joined first or who has the oldest civilization. A senior Kandorian diplomat bristled. The Kandorians have led the coalition for 3,000 years. You suggest we simply step aside for a species that was killing itself a generation ago? I suggest you lead by example, not by tradition, Alex replied calmly. If the Kandorians are truly the best choice for leadership, prove it through action. Let every species contribute according to their strengths. Let decisions be made by those most qualified, not those with the oldest claim. The negotiations were difficult, but slowly a new framework emerged. The coalition would restructure itself into a true alliance of equals, with leadership positions rotating and decisions requiring broader consensus. It was messy and complicated, but it was also more democratic and more resilient. Jake Morrison lived long enough to see the changes taking root. He watched from his home on Mars as humanity found its place in a galaxy that had nearly forgotten them. His lessons at the Naval Academy had taken on new importance. Young officers eager to understand the mistakes that had nearly destroyed their species, so they could avoid repeating them. One evening, as he sat on his balcony watching the sun set over Olympus Mons, his communication system chimed. The caller identification made him smile. It was Lisa Grant calling from the Defiant. "Admiral," he greeted her. "How is the war going?" "We are winning. Lisa said, though her face showed the cost of that victory. Slowly, carefully, but we are winning. The swarm is still out there, still dangerous, but they know now that they cannot consume everything unopposed. Good, Jake said quietly. I am glad I lived to see it. Lisa's expression softened. How are you feeling, Captain? Old, Jake admitted with a slight laugh. Very old, but satisfied. We made the right choice, Lisa. Whatever happens next, we made the right choice. Yes, Lisa agreed. We did. They talked for a while longer, two old soldiers sharing stories and memories. When the call ended, Jake sat in the gathering darkness and thought about his brother, about the millions who had died during the separation war, about the price humanity had paid to learn how to be better. 6 months after the Battle of Kirin Nexus, a joint human coalition fleet launched a major offensive to retake the world of Ether Prime, a planet that held symbolic importance for 3 coalition species. The battle was fierce, the swarm fighting with renewed desperation to hold what they had taken. But the combined fleet was stronger, smarter, better,